Hello and welcome. As we more and more begin to realize that physical reality is not as solid as it appears to be, and that consciousness is linked to the reality that we perceive, the relationship between the mind, the brain, and reality becomes an increasingly relevant question. One author who explored this question in an interesting, as well as entertaining way, was Robert Anton Wilson. He explored the nature of reality, consciousness, and perception through the lens of both psychology and quantum physics. In his book called Quantum Psychology, Wilson delves deeply into the ways in which our minds create and interact with reality, pushing us to question the nature of what we perceive as truth. One of his key insights is the recognition that much of what we experience is a construct shaped by our neurological and social conditioning, rather than an absolute objective reality. This can be seen very directly in how we, through selective perception, filter out information that doesn't conform to our identity, opinions, and worldviews, or distort information to fit with said identity, opinions, and worldviews. We also have a tendency to put information that doesn't conform to who we are and how we want to see the world under heavy scrutiny, while accepting that which doesn't challenge us without questioning it. But according to Wilson, it runs much deeper than that. At the heart of quantum psychology is the idea that our minds act as filters through which we interpret the world. This interpretation is influenced by the language we use, the culture we are part of, and the neurological patterns embedded within us. In other words, reality as we perceive it is not necessarily what reality is, but rather what we are capable of understanding based on our mental programming. Wilson often emphasizes that these neurological filters are largely unconscious, meaning that we are usually unaware of how much they shape our perception of the world. Think of all the ways that your mind is being programmed from birth to death. You are programmed by your parents' opinions, beliefs, and worldviews, by your culture, your peer group, work environment, by the media you consume, your personal experiences, and how you interpret them, the educational system, and so on. Think of what this means if there is no objective, hard fact reality that we can interact with. Perhaps we are locked into a very narrow way of experiencing, interpreting, and interacting with reality in comparison with what is actually possible. Skepticism is of course understandable, but you're first and foremost invited to ask yourself the question: what do I really know about reality? When you realize, beyond any doubt, that reality is much more than we perceive with the five senses, anything logically becomes possible until one knows more about the hitherto hidden aspects of reality. Therefore, let's look a bit at Wilson's influences. One of those is the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, which was developed in the early 20th century by quantum physicists Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg. It posits that particles do not have definite states until they are observed. Instead, they exist in a superposition of all possible states, and observation collapses this superposition into a single outcome. This interpretation challenges classical determinism by introducing the role of the observer in shaping reality. Max Born and others contributed to this theory, emphasizing probability over certainty in predicting quantum behavior, which becomes important as we delve deeper into Wilson's ideas. The Copenhagen interpretation remains one of the most influential perspectives in quantum physics today. Wilson draws an analogy between this principle and human psychology, suggesting that just as the act of observation influences quantum phenomena, the way we observe and think about the world influences our reality. This notion challenges the traditional idea of a singular, objective truth, promoting instead a more flexible and relativistic view of the world, where truth is largely subjective and dependent on the observer. Here, it could be fruitful to mention an exercise that Wilson did not invent, but mentions in his books. The exercise is as follows. Take an opinion or belief that you hold and try to find evidence and arguments for the exact opposite of that opinion or belief. For For the exercise to be effective, you have to take it seriously, though. What you usually will find is a host of arguments for the disliked opinion or belief. Thus, Wilson encourages readers to question their own belief systems, which he refers to as reality tunnels. A reality tunnel is a framework through which one interprets all incoming data. These tunnels are built from a combination of sensory input, cultural conditioning, and personal experiences. In quantum psychology, Wilson suggests that by becoming aware of these reality tunnels, one can begin to transcend them, opening up to new ways of perceiving and interacting with the world. This process is central to what he calls neurological relativism, the recognition that different people live in different perceptual worlds based on their unique neurological wiring and cognitive patterns. These ideas take some time to wrap your mind around, but a good start is the understanding that neurological processes control the reality you perceive, rather than that reality controls your neurological processes. This also echoes the ideas of the philosopher Immanuel Kant and others, who stated that we only have access to our own experience, and that we cannot say anything for sure about the sense data that the experience is presumably built upon. This then becomes even crazier when you consider that our so-called reality consists of 99.99% empty space. A key concept in Wilson's work is what he calls model agnosticism. He argues that no single model of reality is entirely correct. Instead, every model is just that, a model or a map that attempts to represent reality but never fully encapsulates it. This idea echoes the famous phrase, "The map is not the territory," which points to the limitations of any model or theory in fully capturing the complexities of reality, and is an exceptional antidote to our tendency to confuse language with reality, which we will talk a bit more about in just a moment. Wilson urges us to maintain a certain skepticism towards all models of reality, whether they are scientific, religious, or philosophical, recognizing that each one has its limitations and blind spots. Wilson also incorporates principles from General Semantics, a system of language and meaning developed by Alfred Korzybski. General Semantics teaches that language structures our thoughts and thus our experience of reality. Wilson, taking this further, explores how the words and labels we use shape our perceptions and experiences. By becoming more aware of the language we use, especially abstract terms like truth, reality, and self, we can begin to deconstruct some of the automatic assumptions we make about the world. In line with this, Wilson proposes a more fluid use of language, encouraging the reader to move beyond the rigid, either-or thinking that often defines our understanding of the world. For example, instead of thinking in terms of right or wrong, he advocates for a more probabilistic way of thinking, inspired by quantum theory. In this view, statements about reality are seen in terms of probabilities rather than certainties. This perspective allows for a more open-minded approach to life, where multiple possibilities can coexist, and certainty is replaced by a more playful and flexible engagement with reality. Applied the concepts right and wrong, probabilistic thinking would not view them as fixed absolutes, but as flexible judgments based on varying perspectives and contexts. Instead of seeing things in binary terms, Wilson would encourage us to consider the probabilities and likelihoods of outcomes, recognizing that what might seem right in one situation could be wrong in another. By embracing uncertainty, Wilson advocates for a more open, adaptable mindset where decisions are made based on available information and possible consequences, rather than rigid moral judgments that ignore the complexity of reality. Wilson also explores the impact of belief systems on human psychology, pointing out that what we believe about the world often shapes how we experience it. He encourages a playful approach to belief, suggesting that rather than holding rigidly to a single belief system, we experiment with different beliefs, much like trying on different sets of clothes. By doing so, we can experience reality in different ways, and become less attached to any one particular worldview. This flexibility in belief, Wilson argues, is key to personal freedom and psychological growth. In quantum psychology, Wilson frequently returns to the idea of self-awareness as a tool for liberation. He advocates for a process of deconditioning, whereby we become aware of the unconscious beliefs and assumptions that limit our perception of reality. This process is likened to a form of psychological housecleaning, where outdated and unhelpful beliefs are discarded, allowing for a more expansive and liberated way of thinking. Wilson suggests that through this process, we can break free from the limitations imposed by our cultural and neurological conditioning and experience a broader spectrum of reality. Another important theme in Wilson's work is the exploration of the limits of human knowledge. He argues that much of what we take for granted as knowledge is based on assumptions that can never be fully verified. Drawing on the ideas of quantum physics, where uncertainty and indeterminacy are fundamental, Wilson suggests that a certain humility is necessary when it comes to understanding the world. Instead of seeking certainty, he advocates for a stance of curiosity and openness, where we acknowledge the limits of our knowledge and remain open to new possibilities. Wilson's ideas also challenge traditional concepts of identity and self. He suggests that the self is not a fixed, permanent entity, but rather a fluid and ever-changing process. This view is supported by modern neuroscience, which shows that our sense of self is a product of the brain's constantly shifting activity. By recognizing the impermanence and fluidity of the self, Wilson argues, we can free ourselves from many of the anxieties and limitations that come with a rigid sense of identity. And if you think about it, where is this I that you feel that you are? The more you look, the more you will find that awareness is the only constant. Everything else is in a state of change. Your thoughts can give you the illusion of being a separate self based on interests, opinions, beliefs, gender, likes, dislikes, etc. But is any of this really you? What you will find out if you look long enough is that the only constant is pure awareness. Thus, quantum psychology, in many ways, is a call to embrace uncertainty and to question the rigid structures of thought that often confine us. Wilson encourages us to cultivate a sense of playfulness and experimentation in our thinking, to be willing to try out new perspectives and to remain open to the possibility that reality is far more complex and mysterious than we can ever fully understand. In summary, Robert Anton Wilson's quantum psychology is a profound exploration of the nature of reality, consciousness, and perception. By integrating insights from psychology, quantum physics, and general semantics, Wilson offers a radical and liberating approach to understanding the world and ourselves. It challenges us to question our assumptions, to be open to new ways of thinking, and to embrace the uncertainty that is an inherent part of existence. In doing so, it offers a path to greater freedom, creativity, and personal growth, inviting us to step beyond the limitations of our conditioned minds. When you start understanding what Wilson is talking about, it can be quite frightening, as you realize that you cannot rely on the things you thought you knew about reality, and that the belief systems that you've relied upon so far cannot be trusted to tell you the truth about yourself, the world, and other people. This is so because you can no longer trust your brain to give you an accurate representation of an objective reality or discern truth from falsehood when it comes to the information that you are presented with or the views and ideas that you are asked to believe in. However, you are advised to be wary of the conclusions that you draw from this, as relativism is also just another reality tunnel. Just because our relationship to truth, objectivity, and our ability to know the truth is much more complex than what it appears to be, and that this rabbit hole might even be much deeper than some serious reflection would lead you to conclude, it doesn't mean that there are no such things as absolute truths. You are completely free to decide for yourself what to think, how you relate to this information, and what conclusions you draw from it. This is something that Wilson would likely agree on. You've now reached the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for your time.